Grandson opened grandpa's trench coat. One hidden tattoo told the true side. The tattoo on his deceased grandfather's chest was moving, shifting beneath the skin, as if trying to escape. Timothy Harper stood frozen, his hands still clutching the worn trench coat he had just pulled open during the private viewing at Westlake Funeral Home. The intricate ink design, never mentioned by any family member, seemed to writhe and pulse with impossible life, despite the old man's body having been embalmed 48 hours earlier. As Timothy stared in disbelief, the military-style insignia, with its distinctive eagle and strange numerical sequence, began to bleed fresh crimson blood that pooled against the waxy skin. The young man stumbled backward, knocking over a flower arrangement, as funeral home director Marcus Wells rushed in, responding to the crash. When both men looked back at the open casket, the blood had vanished, but the tattoo remained. Completely still now, a permanent mark that should never have existed on the chest of Timothy's quiet, church-going grandfather. "That's impossible," whispered Wells, a 30-year veteran of mortuary science with credentials from Johns Hopkins University and over 2,000 bodies prepared throughout his career. "I personally prepared your grandfather's body. There was no tattoo." His voice trembled slightly as he approached the casket, adjusting his glasses to examine the marking more closely. "This design was not here during the embalming process. I would have documented it in my preparation notes as required by state law." The funeral director's confusion quickly turned to clinical curiosity. He retrieved his preparation file from his office and returned, flipping through detailed notes and photographs taken during the embalming process. "See for yourself," he said, showing Timothy the standard documentation photos. The images clearly showed Walter Harper's bare chest, unmarked, untattooed, with only the expected signs of aging and the small eye incision from the autopsy. This tattoo simply did not exist yesterday. Timothy couldn't reconcile what he was seeing. His grandfather, Walter James Harper, 87 years old, retired high school history teacher, devoted husband to his late wife Martha for 59 years, had been the most ordinary, predictable man imaginable. The kind of grandfather who wore cardigans with elbow patches, read newspaper editorials aloud at breakfast, and maintained a meticulous garden behind his modest home in Millfield, Pennsylvania. He had never mentioned military service beyond what everyone in the family knew, a brief, uneventful stint in administrative services toward the end of the Korean War. Yet here was evidence of something else entirely, something impossible. The tattoo featured an eagle clutching what appeared to be a modified iron cross, with the numerical sequence beneath it, 77138823. Around this central image were phrases in what Timothy recognized as German, arranged in a circular pattern. His undergraduate German courses weren't enough to translate the archaic-looking text, but he could make out words that seemed to reference eternal service and blood oath. As Wells examined the marking more carefully, he noticed something even more disturbing. The skin around the tattoo was warm to the touch, significantly warmer than the surrounding tissue, defying all biological principles of death. "This breaks every natural law I understand," he whispered, mostly to himself. "Bodies don't develop new features after death, and they certainly don't maintain differential temperatures days after cardiac cessation." Timothy pulled out his phone, but Wells gently stopped him. "No photographs, please. Not yet. This situation is unprecedented. We need to contact the proper authorities before documenting this further." The funeral director's professional demeanor had given way to genuine unease, his hands visibly shaking as he carefully closed Walter Harper's dress shirt, covering the impossible tattoo. That night, unable to sleep, Timothy began searching online for information about the symbols he had seen. His research led him down increasingly disturbing paths, from historical accounts of occult divisions within Nazi Germany's SS to fringe theories about secret post-war American intelligence programs that had recruited German scientists and military personnel. The eagle design bore similarities to insignia used by a little-known SS division called Sonderkommando Thule, reportedly tasked with investigating occult artifacts for potential military applications. By morning, Timothy had compiled enough troubling information to make a decision. Despite the funeral director's caution, he returned to the funeral home at dawn, determined to photograph the tattoo before the public viewing scheduled for later that day. Using his emergency key, provided by Wells in case family members wanted additional private time with the deceased, Timothy entered the quiet building and made his way to the preparation room where his grandfather's body was being kept overnight. What he found there would haunt him for the rest of his life. The preparation room door was ajar, emitting a strange, pulsing blue light that seemed to synchronize with a low humming sound. Inside, Timothy discovered his grandfather's body on the embalming table, but not as he had left it. Walter Harper was sitting upright, eyes still closed, the tattoo on his chest now glowing with the same blue luminescence that filled the room. Timothy dropped to his knees, his entire body trembling with terror and disbelief. This was medically impossible. His grandfather had been clinically dead for nearly 4 days, yet here he was, upright, with a glowing tattoo that seemed to be the source of the strange light and sound filling the room. Just as Timothy began to back away toward the door, his grandfather's eyes snapped open. They were not the warm hazel eyes Timothy remembered. These were solid black, reflecting nothing, absorbing all light that touched them. When Walter Harper spoke, his voice was not his own, but a discordant overlay of multiple tones, as if several people were speaking simultaneously through him. "You should not have come, Timothy," the entity using his grandfather's body said. "Some secrets must remain buried with their keepers." Timothy couldn't move, couldn't breathe. This violation of natural law paralyzed him with a primal fear beyond anything he had ever experienced. The thing wearing Walter Harper's face tilted its head at an impossible angle, regarding Timothy with those black, empty eyes. "Your grandfather made a blood oath 73 years ago. His service wasn't finished," the voices continued. "We do not release our own until the work is complete." At that moment, Marcus Wells appeared in the doorway, his face draining of all color as he took in the impossible scene. In his hand, he clutched a small, worn leather journal. "I found this hidden in the lining of your grandfather's trench coat," he said, his voice barely audible. "You need to see this." The journal, written in Walter Harper's unmistakable neat handwriting, told a story so far removed from the quiet life Timothy had known that it seemed to describe another man entirely. The earliest entries, dated from 1947, were written in German before transitioning to English in later pages. They detailed Walter's recruitment as a 17-year-old into a specialized unit operating under the direct command of Heinrich Himmler, focused on researching ancient Germanic and Nordic occult practices. As Wells and Timothy quickly skimmed through the journal, the figure on the table remained unnaturally still, watching them with those bottomless black eyes. The humming in the room intensified, making it difficult to concentrate on the increasingly disturbing contents of the journal. Walter Harper had not been an American who served briefly in Korea as everyone believed. According to his own writings, he was born Walter Harbach in Munich in 1930, recruited into the Thule Society's youth division at 16, and eventually assigned to a secret SS research facility in the Harz Mountains. After the war, through Operation Paperclip, the U.S. intelligence program that recruited German scientists and military specialists, he had been given a new identity and brought to America along with dozens of other young recruits with specialized knowledge. But Walter's journal revealed something far more sinister than merely hiding his German origins. The research at the Harz facility had involved attempts to create what was described as anchors for non-corporeal entities, essentially methods to bind powerful spiritual forces to human hosts. The tattoos were not mere insignia, but mystical bindings, designed to create living vessels for something else to inhabit. "The binding is passed through bloodline when the host expires," Timothy read aloud from one of the later entries, dated just 3 months ago. "I have kept it dormant for decades through the medications and rituals, but I can feel it awakening as my body fails. May God forgive me for what comes next. I have no choice but to prepare my grandson." As Timothy read these words, he became acutely aware of an identical burning sensation developing on his own chest, directly over his heart. Tearing open his shirt, he watched in horror as the same tattoo that marked his grandfather was now appearing on his own skin, the lines forming as if drawn by an invisible needle, burning into his flesh one agonizing line at a time. Dr. Rebecca Stern, leading researcher at the Department of Historical Analysis and Authentication at Princeton University, would later document this case in her controversial paper, Transgenerational Epigenetic Transference, or Occult Phenomena, the Harper Incident. Her academic career nearly ended when she published detailed photographs and medical scans of Timothy Harper's spontaneously appearing tattoo, along with tissue samples showing highly unusual cellular activity that defied conventional biological understanding. The Harper case represents either the most elaborate hoax in modern medical history or evidence of phenomena that fundamentally challenges our understanding of death, consciousness, and possibly the nature of reality itself, Dr. Stern wrote in her introduction. The academic establishment largely dismissed her work as pseudoscientific sensationalism, but the physical evidence, particularly the tissue samples showing cellular structures never before documented in humans, remained irrefutable. What happened next at the funeral home was witnessed by both Wells and the first responding officer, Deputy Sheriff Michael Conley, who had arrived after Wells called 911 reporting a break-in. Both men provided sworn statements describing events so bizarre that they were initially held for psychiatric evaluation before being released when their accounts proved remarkably consistent despite separate questioning. According to their testimony, as the tattoo formed on Timothy's chest, Walter Harper's body began to undergo a transformation. The skin grew taut over the bones, the elderly features reshaping into something younger yet inhuman, the face becoming angular, the fingers elongating into talon-like appendages. The humming in the room reached a painful intensity, causing Deputy Conley's nose and ears to bleed as he attempted to approach the two Harpers. The younger man and the corpse seemed to be connected by arcs of blue electrical energy, Conley stated in his official report. I attempted to separate them using a wooden pole from a floor lamp, but the pole disintegrated into ash upon contact with the energy field. At this point, the older Harper, or what had once been him, spoke in what sounded like German mixed with something else I couldn't identify. The words seemed to physically affect the room, causing the glass in picture frames to shatter and the light fixtures to explode. What saved Timothy from whatever was happening came from an unexpected source. Marcus Wells, operating on desperate instinct rather than any established mortuary protocol, grabbed a container of embalming fluid and threw it over both Harpers, disrupting whatever process was unfolding between them. The blue energy dispersed with a thunderous crack that threw all three men against the walls of the preparation room. When they regained consciousness minutes later, Walter Harper's body had returned to its natural state, an ordinary deceased 87-year-old man, with no tattoo visible on his chest. Timothy, however, now bore the marking permanently, though it had changed subtly in the transfer. The numerical sequence was different: 77, 13, 88, 24. One digit higher than his grandfather's. Dr. Catherine Morgan, chief medical examiner for Allegheny County and a 27-year veteran of forensic medicine, personally conducted a second autopsy on Walter Harper's remains. Her findings documented no evidence of any tattoo or unusual markings, contradicting the sworn testimony of 4 witnesses who had seen it clearly before the incident. This case has made me question fundamental aspects of forensic science that I previously considered irrefutable, Dr. Morgan. Morgan wrote in her sealed report, which was later leaked to the press, "The physical evidence simply does not align with credible witness testimony, including that of a fellow medical professional." Timothy Harper was hospitalized for 3 weeks following the incident, suffering from unexplained neurological symptoms and severe burns in the pattern of the tattoo. During this time, hospital staff reported numerous equipment malfunctions in his room, including heart monitors that displayed impossible readings and CT scanners that produced images showing what radiologists described as shadow structures overlapping with Timothy's normal anatomy. Dr. James Whitaker, the neurologist who treated Timothy, documented unusual brain activity patterns never before observed in medical literature. Harper's brain scans show simultaneous activity in regions that should be neurologically impossible to activate concurrently, Whitaker noted in his case study. Furthermore, we observed periodic synchronization between his neural patterns and unexplained electromagnetic pulses that affected equipment throughout the hospital wing. 6 months after the incident, Timothy Harper disappeared from his apartment in Pittsburgh. Investigators found his residence undisturbed, except for an elaborate series of symbols drawn on the walls of every room, symbols that matched elements of the tattoo, reproduced hundreds of times in what forensic psychologists described as a state of extreme psychological distress or compulsion. Among Timothy's possessions, police discovered additional journals apparently written by Walter Harper, detailing the origins of what he called the binding in even greater detail. These writings described how, in the final days of World War II, the SS Thule Division had performed rituals at 7 different sites across Germany, attempting to bind ancient Germanic entities known as the Gefolge, or retinue, to human hosts as a last-ditch effort to turn the tide of the war. "We were young, fanatical, and believed we were saving our homeland," Walter wrote. "None of us understood that we were offering ourselves as vessels for something that had never been human, something that had waited in the darkness between worlds for millennia, seeking a way to enter our reality." According to these newly discovered writings, the binding ritual had been partially successful, attaching these entities to their human hosts but not fully allowing them control. The bound individuals, including Walter, were subsequently captured by American forces, their unusual abilities and knowledge making them valuable assets despite their Nazi affiliations. Under Operation Paperclip, they were given new identities and distributed throughout various American military and scientific installations. "They kept us separated, not understanding that the binding connected us regardless of physical distance," one entry explained. "They studied what made us different without ever comprehending the true nature of what they were dealing with. They thought they had contained a weapon they could someday use, never realizing they had invited something ancient and patient into their midst." The most disturbing aspect of the journals was Walter's claim that 77 individuals had received the binding tattoo, each with a unique numerical sequence. If his writings were to be believed, Timothy had inherited not just a marking, but his grandfather's place in this group, becoming the 24th vessel for whatever entity had been bound to the 88th bloodline. Harvard theologian and religious historian Dr. Abraham Finkelstein analyzed photocopies of the journals, connecting the described rituals to pre-Christian Germanic practices mentioned in obscure historical texts. What Harper's writings describe bears remarkable similarities to ancient Norse concepts of the Einherjar, warriors bound to supernatural entities who would return after death to serve again, Dr. Finkelstein noted. The difference here is the suggestion that modern occultists found a way to technologically enhance and systematize what was once purely mystical practice. International authorities became involved when similar cases began emerging across 3 continents. In Buenos Aires, the grandson of a German immigrant who had arrived in Argentina in 1946 reported spontaneous bleeding from a mysterious tattoo that had appeared on his chest following his grandfather's death. In Melbourne, Australia, a 28-year-old woman with German ancestry was hospitalized after experiencing seizures during her grandfather's funeral, only for medical staff to discover an identical marking with its own unique numerical sequence forming on her skin. In all, 17 cases were documented worldwide over a 2-year period following the Harper incident. In each case, the pattern was identical: the death of an elderly person with obscured ties to Germany, followed by the spontaneous appearance of similar tattoos on a blood descendant. 14 of these individuals subsequently disappeared, leaving behind walls covered in identical symbolic patterns. The pattern of disappearances created enough concern that Interpol established Task Force Thule, dedicated to locating the missing persons and investigating potential connections to remaining paperclip scientists. Their investigation led to a remarkable discovery in the mountains of northern Idaho, a compound where 5 of the missing individuals, including Timothy Harper, had apparently gathered voluntarily. When federal agents raided the location, they found an elaborate ritual space containing 7 chairs arranged in a circle, each carved with symbols matching elements of the tattoos. The chairs were empty, but showed evidence of recent use. More disturbing was what investigators found beneath the floorboards, a cache of documents dating back to 1945, including original SS orders signed by Himmler himself authorizing the Thule Division's final operations. Among these papers was a map marking 7 locations across Europe, with a corresponding map of the United States showing 7 analogous points based on some unknown geographical calculation. One of these points matched the location of the Idaho compound exactly. Another corresponded to Walter Harper's hometown of Millfield, Pennsylvania. FBI Special Agent Diana Mercer, who led the Idaho raid, reported finding one final piece of evidence that connected everything. A modern journal apparently written in Timothy Harper's handwriting, containing just one repeated phrase in German, Sieben Tore, sieben Schlüssel, eine Rückkehr. 7 gates, 7 keys, 1 return. The compound was placed under 24-hour surveillance, but nothing unusual was reported until exactly 7 months after the raid. At precisely 3:13 in the morning, multiple witnesses reported seeing intense blue light emanating from the empty building. By the time agents entered the structure, there was nothing to find except scorch marks on the floor arranged in the now familiar pattern of the Thule insignia. To this day, Timothy Harper and the other 16 individuals remain missing. Walter Harper's body was cremated following the second autopsy, his ashes scattered according to his will. The original trench coat that had concealed his secret for decades was placed in secure storage at an undisclosed government facility after multiple researchers reported feeling unexplained physical effects when handling the garment. The most troubling development came 18 months after the Idaho incident, when satellite imagery detected unusual thermal signatures at all 7 of the American locations marked on the recovered map. Each showed an identical heat pattern resembling the Thule insignia when viewed from above, visible only on infrared scans. Environmental scientists have been unable to explain these formations, which appear to be maintaining constant temperature regardless of surrounding conditions. Dr. Stern, who continued investigating despite professional ostracism, published one final paper before her own mysterious disappearance. In it, she suggested that the 17 missing individuals might represent only the first wave of a larger awakening. If Walter Harper's journals are accurate, she wrote, we must consider the possibility that up to 77 bloodlines were prepared during the original binding ritual. We have documented only 17 cases thus far. What happens when the remaining 60 individuals join whatever process has begun remains the most urgent, unanswered question of our time. The last known communication from Timothy Harper was a handwritten letter mailed to Marcus Wells 3 days before the Idaho compound was discovered. It contained only 4 sentences. The binding was never meant to contain them. It was an invitation. What my grandfather began, I must complete. They have waited long enough. The doors are finally opening. What does the tattoo on your family member's body really mean? Could ancient rituals still be affecting us in the modern world? If you found this investigation disturbing, leave a comment below telling me which part sent chills down your spine. Subscribe to Dark Chronicles for more exposés of hidden historical horrors that continue to haunt our present. Remember, some secrets are buried for a reason, but the truth always finds a way to surface.